Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. So welcome to the training, which is all about how we build an agency pipeline using commonality-driven email outreach. For a little bit about me, I'm Dan Englander. I'm CEO and founder of Sales Schema. My background originally is in the agency space, first working on the account side for a social media boutique shop circa 2010, led business development for a number of years for a creative services shop, helped them grow to seven figures, win a couple dozen Fortune 500s, tried every tactic under the sun while shuffling back and forth between client service and sales. Around 2014, started Sales Schema. And basically what we do is we help agencies and B2B service companies make new business a lot more reliable by implementing the right targeted outreach systems. Most of our experience from working with 110 plus agencies is by actually doing this for organizations. And in the last year or so, we have developed this into a training and implementation program so that agencies can be much better, faster, stronger by actually owning a lot of these practices in-house. I've developed a lot of this into a methodology called Relationship Sales at Scale, published a book by the same name pretty recently. Also on our team is Luis Rodriguez and Michelle Brown in a leadership position. Per the boxing glove there and the picture of me on the mats, we have a lot of fight metaphors that weave their way through the company because I'm really into jiu-jitsu and Luis is into boxing. Beyond that, I've got a newborn named Adrian and a wife named Sarah, and that keeps me busy, and I live in New York. So that's the obligatory lifestyle slide, so you know that I'm not a Russian deepfake or whatever. But if you're here, you might be curious to know how we're doing Outbound, to learn a bunch of slick tactics and everything for getting more meetings. And I promise that if you stick around, we are going to get to all that good stuff before long. But we have to start with the right order of operations here, because if the right foundation isn't there, it doesn't matter what tactic me or anybody else gives you, you're probably not going to be able to implement it very well. So as usual, we are going to start with why, then when, who, what, and how. So starting with why, from working with 110 plus agencies, there are a few aspirations that we typically see our clients and others going for. They're not mutually exclusive, and they also are not till the end of time. I can almost think of these as like seasonal aspirations that might last a few months or even a few years at a time. But at any given time, we find that our clients are either looking to grow. This might mean growing revenues or headcount, or thinking about acquiring an organization or growing to a new location or whatever it may be. We have many others that are looking for security and lifestyle. What this can mean is looking to get out from under the weight of a guerrilla client or guerrilla partner, being able to choose clients instead of the other way around so that the team can do really fun and stimulating work. Lifestyle, that can mean obviously going home at an earlier hour, opening up more time, more liberty to do whatever so that owners can work on higher leverage stuff or just spend more time with family and so on. I would say in the early years of the company, it was more so door one. Now it's definitely more companies that are entering door two. Everybody wants growth to some degree, but oftentimes security and lifestyle is a bigger guiding light. The third door here is transition. And this is where the agency is going for perhaps selling. Maybe the owner or owners are looking to retire in a few years. This transition doesn't just have to mean that. It could also involve changing the deliverable, optimizing the deliverable, moving from one service to another, or going forward with the process of specializing and honing in on one vertical or maybe a couple verticals. So regardless of this aspiration, what we found is that there is one key metric that is the lead domino. If the agency is able to optimize for this, then they're usually able to bring everything else along with it. And that is enterprise value. If the agency is building an organization that somebody else could want to buy, then they are building a strong organization, regardless of whether they want to get to seven figures or eight figures or stay at 5 people or get to 100. It doesn't really matter about whatever your individual goal is. Enterprise value is objectively a good thing to build. And from not just us, seeing this and talking to clients, talking to agencies that have gone through it, but also interviewing people that really have been through lots of acquisitions, have really gone through what it takes to sell an agency for big multiples. People like David Tobin from Tobin Leff, who's buying and selling, dealing with these transactions all day. We have found that there's the main bottleneck that gets in the way of building enterprise value is owners being stuck in the sales seat and having most of the new business practices being reactive, being because, hey, we know somebody over here, and when they go to a different company, they take us with them, and kind of getting most of the business unpredictably from referrals. So when it comes time for owners to get out of the sales seat, and when they're thinking about doing this, it often happens in the wrong way. And we call these the siren song mistakes because they can be very enticing, and either the agency has a lot of resources, maybe you've had a big year and you're like, great, let me go hire a salesperson, or maybe you're frustrated from your sales process and things aren't going well and you're thinking, well, I just don't want to do this anymore, so I'm going to go hire a salesperson. These are all the things that tend to take people off course, just like Odysseus in the classics. So the first is the superhuman owner. Now, as I'm going to talk about, it's pretty much inescapable that in the early days, or even far past the early days, the owners are going to have to do some measure of sales while also managing other things. This, though, the superhuman owner, is a form of magical thinking where the owner or owners have all these tactics that they want to implement, all these shiny objects, even stuff that I might talk about, but they haven't really thought about building the support systems and scaffolding in terms of human resources and time that should go into supporting the person doing sales. So it's kind of this magical thinking trap. The second mistake we see is the lonely islands, or the lonely sales island. This is a situation in an agency typically with multiple partners where everybody is sort of handling their own new business, or even if there is some collaboration, sales becomes this downtime hobby. It's done when it's convenient, and the reason it's called the islands is because a lead comes in and it's CPG, and the agency says, great, when it's CPG, it goes to Lisa because she worked at Frito-Lay. The tech lead comes in and it goes to Bob because he worked at, let's say, Cisco. So that doesn't really work because there isn't one consistent point person running it and the right resources going to essentially the growth of the organization, which is obviously important. The third, I think, is the most costly and the most time consuming. And this is the premature sales hire. The reason there is an icon of a driver is because it's a little bit like hiring a driver before you have a car. And the problem with this is that salespeople, especially good ones, are successful within an existing system. You can have a great sales interview process, get all that dialed in perfectly, and still hire at the wrong time for where the agency is at. So what happens is that driver is sort of floundering after 3, 6, 9, 12 months because the agency has tasked them with something that's much bigger than their pay grade, a very entrepreneurial task of developing, targeting, building these systems, implementing them, and so on, which pretty much has to be the owners for a time anyway, which I'll talk about. And the last trap is the conscript. We've seen this happen fairly often where the ownership kind of pushes somebody in the organization into that sales role. This could be a client service person or somebody that hasn't really taken full ownership or hasn't developed an understanding for what the role is or what they would be doing. It's kind of a worse version of the premature sales hire, and that usually doesn't work out. So with all this in mind, a lot of the times people are thinking too quickly about who they should hire as opposed to when. So as we talked about at the beginning, we're going to get to the when now. This brings us to the 4 stages of agency strength. We've called this different things. We used to call this growth. Right now we're calling it strength. Who knows? It could change in the future. But I think what's important about this is that it's unpegged to revenue or headcount or anything like that. It doesn't matter whether you want to grow massively or you want to have a business that protects your life and your time. It doesn't matter what your aspirations are. If you do this in the right order, it's going to let you grow in the right way. And that first stage of agency strength is the glorified freelancer. This is where most agencies have to start, and this is where there is an owner or multiple owners bouncing back and forth between sales and client service to kind of make the whole thing work. It's typified by a lot of chaos and burnout. Now, there's nothing wrong necessarily with being a freelancer, just as long as you know that and you know that you're not really building an organization that could be sold one day. So as far as who, to go from when to who, at this stage, what we recommend is that the owners not fall prey to those mistakes and that they actually continue to own the sales process pretty much entirely, not even making monetary investments that are significant in sales and marketing. What this is more about is slowly, or not even slowly, but gradually stair-stepping out of fulfillment so that the owner can eat, live, and breathe sales and new business so that they could, hone the value prop and grow to the next stage. At this next stage, this might look very familiar. This probably represents 50 to 80% of the clients we work with. And this is called the cobbler's children. This is a situation where the agency has developed a strong track record, sometimes over years. We've even worked with agencies with dozens of employees, maybe even scraping the 8-figure level, that I would be very confident to call cobbler's children, because most, or if not all, of the new business is reactive and comes from the owners. So the owners have created a situation where they really can't step away from the company. So at this stage, this is where a lot of the times you see the organization fall prey to those siren song mistakes. More than any other, it happens right here, the premature hires and all those other things. So when we talk about constructing the car before hiring the driver, this is where that's typically going to happen. So as far as the who goes, we recommend that owners continue to run the process and to own it with a little help from their friends in the form of a sales support role, which we'll talk more about in a second. So first, let's talk about that leader, that owner that is running the process at this stage. Some things that they might be doing that pretty much only they can do, that should not be prematurely hired out. The first is talking to prospects in the context of a complex B2B sales cycle. Another example is developing ideal client profiles, or ICPs. That's not something a salesperson is going to be able to do. Being able to figure out, based on past, present, future, where the agency's strike zone is and where they should continue to devote time and resources, are experiments that the owner is going to need to run themselves. Crafting email copy, especially given that it's going to be setting up a meeting with the person who's going to be on the call, which is the owner, is pretty much an owner-based task right now in the realm of Outbound. And proposals and closing deals is also going to be an ownership-related task. As a quick slide here, sometimes we have multiple partners, and there's a lot of hemming and hawing and hand-wringing about who should lead sales. Back to the lonely sales islands problem from earlier. I think one thing that's given a little bit too much priority is thinking about, well, who has the biggest Rolodex or who has the most inroads in this particular industry. That can matter, but not as much as some other boxes that we need to check first. So the first is, who has ownership? And by ownership, I mean like who can take the most weight of the process and step up to the plate, and motivation with that in mind to be doing it. Who has the most bandwidth, as in time, typically at least 20 hours per week, if not a lot more, to devote to sales. Or if the bandwidth isn't there yet, who is willing and able to clear off that time? The third is who can offer value on that call with a prospect, because you're not just going to be getting people ready to buy right now. You're going to get people that you have to teach and consult with to move the process forward. So it should be an owner that's able to do that comfortably. And then lastly, it should be somebody that is incentivized. Usually if they're an owner, they should be, but that's a box that we need to make sure is checked. So that's who should be leading sales. You might be wondering about that support role. This is somebody that can really help move the process forward. And this is somebody that's going to help in the construction of those systems in that car that the driver can drive in later. So as far as the who, we've worked with agencies that have seen success with a multitude of people in this role. It could be a client service person that's shaving off a few hours a week consistently. It could be a trusted freelancer, or it could be a junior sales hire if that is somebody you already have in your organization or that you're in the middle of hiring. As far as task examples in the realm of Outbound, and this could go beyond it, this could include research and list building, identifying those companies and people that are a really good fit for the agency. It could include scheduling, going back and forth to get calls lined up for an executive or an owner. It could involve CRM maintenance, keeping that data all clean. It also just could be accountability. This is less of a task and more of just a duty. But what we found is that if the owner has somebody in this role that is staying committed to the process, it becomes a lot harder for them to let stuff slide. Like, hey, I was supposed to follow up with that prospect 15 days ago. What happened with that? So all these things can be really benefited by that sales support role at the cobbler's children phase. So from there, the cobbler's children honestly could take a long time. It might take a long time to get to the point where the agency feels comfortable enough to start to consider hiring a salesperson. But when you're in that phase and you're starting to feel it, we call this the transitional phase. This is where there is traction, but it's volatile. The agency has started to find its voice. They can put their value proposition on a bumper sticker. They're typically seeing traction with at least one scalable revenue channel. Maybe this is outbound, or maybe it's content, speaking at events, or something else. We really like the idea of starting with outbound because it'll let you get in touch with prospects much sooner, much more directly, which I'll talk about. And this is a situation where the owner can clearly devote more than half their time to sales and so on. But most of the new business is still based on reactive referrals, and there's still some volatility and that sort of thing. So at this phase, what we recommend is kind of a couple different options. The first is the owner absolutely should be heavily involved in the process, but if certain building blocks are in place, this is when, in addition to that sales support role, the ownership can think about hiring that salesperson. So you might be wondering, how do we know when we're ready to hire that salesperson? So there's a few things we like to see in place. It's a little bit like catching a wave if you've ever gone surfing before. Usually when you're going surfing, you have to paddle really hard, and the mistake most people make, at least, and I know that I made it when I've gone surfing in the early days, is under paddling, is kind of like not waiting till the wave takes your weight, but stopping too early, and then you have to wait till the next one, which is a problem. So to avoid that, here are a few things you want to have in place. The first is historic data. When the revenue comes from reactive referrals, this data is just simply not there yet. You need a scalable, repeatable channel so that you know, okay, when we have this many conversations, we close this percentage over this time frame. So then you have a benchmark on which to compare an outside person. That's very important. The second is lead flow. This honestly is probably the hardest boss of the video game. You need not only enough leads for that salesperson, but more. As a benchmark, roughly 50% more leads than you would need, again, back to that historic data, to hit your goals, because you are going to want to hedge your bets and take some of those leads as the owner and give others to the salesperson as they are ramping up, especially because they are going to have to wreck some deals and their close rate is going to be lower than yours. The third element here is a consistent deliverable. This is beyond the scope of this training right now, but it becomes much harder to train a salesperson if you have a dozen different services for a dozen different verticals. They are going to be running around chasing their tails for months and years. So getting towards a consistent deliverable makes this a lot easier. And then the last element here is a training and accountability system and the bandwidth for that, so that you can go through essentially watching tape with them, giving this person feedback, and ramping up over time. So from there, you might be wondering, what does the promised land look like? What is that last phase? And it's what we call the enterprise. This is where there are systems and scale. We define this as at least one inbound channel that is producing consistent results, and more importantly, one outbound channel, because that is going to allow the agency to decide who it wants to work with, build relationships with them, and close business, as opposed to just relying on people coming to the agency. That's something obviously I'll talk a lot more about. So as far as who at this stage, what this looks like is systems in place, like I've talked about, which and I'll get into a lot more, that support role, and then that salesperson, so that the ownership can be involved in the sales process exactly when and where the ownership chooses. And this can be a complete game changer. This can open up time to do almost anything. And this is a situation where we've talked to agency owners where the organization is growing without the direct involvement from the ownership. So it's a complete game changer. So to recap real quick, we have talked about the why, all these long-term aspirations, or perhaps seasonal ones, growth, security and lifestyle, transition, whatever it might be. We talked about the when and the who kind of in tandem, which is really when you should think about hiring the right people and doing certain things based on the stage you're at as an agency or B2B service company. That way you're not doing things like hiring prematurely, getting yourself in trouble, and so on. Now we're going to get to the fun stuff, which is the what, and then later the how. So let's talk about the what a little bit. I think that a lot of the times when we talk to agencies that are trying to solve this problem of building a more reliable and repeatable new business system, there is information overwhelm. There's lots of anxiety and stress by all of the options and all of the tactics and all of these shiny objects that it could take to grow. So I really want to spend a quick second simplifying this so we can understand what really the three options are here. So the three options to grow are your existing network, which, if you're in that cobbler's children phase, chances are that's the lion's share of business right now. Maybe you are getting business from your friend who's a CMO and he goes on or she goes on to a different company and takes you with them. That can play out the opposite way too, and you could lose that business. You might have a really tight referral network of people that you know really well, and that's great. And then there's ways to keep doubling down on that and growing that network over time. So that's the first thing. The issue is that's largely reactive. The next option overall, as an umbrella, is inbound marketing, which if you're an agency, you probably know a little something about this, but this could include a lot of things. This could include creating content, could include SEO, it could include ads, it could include speaking engagements. And it's basically, thought leadership and getting your perspective out there to bring people to you. And then there's outbound, which involves whether it's email, LinkedIn, phone, direct mail, passenger pigeon, involves you knocking on doors to build relationships with your future clients. So when we talk to agencies and B2B service companies that have tried outbound before, a big reason that they're not successful is that they're going in with the wrong frame and the wrong expectations about what outbound is and what it isn't. The issue is that most people are looking at outreach as a lead generation channel solely. And yes, it sometimes is a lead generation channel. And to talk about that a little bit more, we're going to look at this diagram of your market, or of really anyone's market for that matter. The fact is, there's going to be a small percentage of people in the bottom left who are actively searching for a solution like an agency. On the far right, there's also a small percentage of people and companies that will never hire you because they're happy or they're just not a fit or whatever it might be. And then there's everybody else, right? This is the vast, vast majority of the market who is problem aware, but not yet necessarily solution aware, right? And we're going to get more into that later. So if you think about outbound as just a lead gen channel and you only want to select for the tail end of people that are actively searching, and you build all of your copy and targeting around just those people, you are really not going to be successful because you're selecting for such a tiny percentage of the market. And guess what's going to happen? Here's the catch-22. Let's say you do manage to connect with those people and convince them to have a conversation with you, enter the sales process. Guess who they're going to be doing business with? The people that built the relationship with them weeks, months, or years prior. So the healthier way to think about outbound is as a relationship building channel that allows you to contact your whole market, right? So to sum it up, the challenge with outbound is you are typically going to have a longer sales cycle with people. You're going to be getting in at an earlier stage, but there's some major advantages as well that really, really make it worth it. Here's a few of them. The first is kind of the flip of that. Because you are getting in earlier, you get to build that relationship and guide the decision-making process at an earlier stage. It's high ROI. While there is going to be work and investment and all that stuff at the beginning, once you get your stride with it and once you're optimizing over time, it can be much higher ROI than a lot of inbound channels that involve paying for ads and creating content and that sort of thing. You're really thinking about the time and then a pretty nominal investment in software and other tools. Beyond that, you get ownership and control. This means you get to decide on the precise companies and people that you want to open doors with and do business with, as opposed to building a funnel where you're going to have to separate a lot of wheat from chaff and spend a lot of time doing that. You really get to decide. And then the last advantage is that outbound is versatile and high impact. A lot of the times we're working with agencies that are doing other marketing initiatives. Maybe they're speaking at events, or they're going to trade shows, or they're putting out content. Outbound can weave its way into all of that sort of thing, to set up meetings before, during, and after events, to follow up with people that might have attended a webinar. Outbound as a skill set is really fluent with everything else. So that's what outbound has going for it. I'm going to dig more into this in the next few slides, but I think another issue is that people are thinking about outbound in a way that is way too complicated and way too expansive for most agencies that are, have a pretty limited total addressable market. So with this slide, I want to set the expectation that this is not going to be easy. It's going to take time to ramp this up and to get it going, but this is meant to show the conservative potential of what happens if you can make outbound work by looking at the 12-month napkin math. Just as a hypothetical example, this may not match our situation perfectly, but it's similar to many situations that we encounter. So let's say you're an agency, you're a B2B service company, you're getting more specialized, and within a particular niche or vertical, there's around 7,000 companies that are really good fits to do business with, and you found this through the data. So out of that, let's say there's 3 people within each company that you could get in with. So let's say there's 21,000 people you could contact over the course of a year. Next, let's assume a meeting rate of just 0.5%. That might take a little bit of time to ramp up to, but it's a pretty conservative average for meeting rate once you get this going. And let's say your close rate on held meetings that you actually have is 10%. Again, that might take some time to build up, but that is not our number. That's a pretty standard average close rate for outbound meetings. So you're talking to 10 people, you're going on to close, one of them over the course of your sales cycle. So let's do the math here. So 21,000 people times 0.5% equals 105 net new meetings per year. That comes to about 2 meetings a week if we're assuming 50 working weeks in the year. And then 105 times 10% is 10 and a half, 10 to 11 net new deals per year. So if you're an agency, B2B service company, and your average deal size is anywhere from, 20, 30, 50,000, and we have other clients that are getting well into the 6-figure range or even up to 7 figures, this can be completely transformative as a channel. And also, this example is conservative and not even scratching the surface of what can happen if you bring up those rates or your market happens to be bigger and the volume goes up, or any number of levers that you could potentially pull. But the issue is, a lot of the times, agencies and B2B service companies are overcomplicating the process. They're using the wrong tactics for their market, kind of the square peg round hole problem. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. So to recap real quick, we went over the why, the when, and the who. We talked about the what, which is outbound in general and a better way to think about it. And now we're going to talk about the how. So when most agencies and B2B service companies try outbound, they are usually using a broken playbook that we believe is becoming less and less effective for everybody, but especially agency and B2B service companies. Here's what that tends to look like. This playbook is obsessed with identifying and finding buyers and buyers alone. And then what happens is the copy and the content that's being sent to these people is putting them into this binary of either, yes, I'll enter your sales process and entertain buying from you right now, or I'll tell you to go away, or worse, click the spam button, which destroys deliverability and makes everything else fail. So that's the first issue with this. This isn't always the case, but often with this model, it's based on an SDR or some other junior salesperson that can't really engage in teaching or consulting or running a consultative process. A lot of the times, this playbook is built for software companies and others that have a very different product. It tends to be much more transactional, and it's a product-led sale. There are different dynamics for agencies and B2B service companies that I'm going to talk about more very shortly. With this broken playbook, this is also typically where we see that spray and pray approach, where there's thousands of people contacted weekly. This is problematic for most specialized agencies and B2B service companies because there aren't that many companies in their total addressable market mostly. So contacting thousands is A, not possible, and B, very risky, right? Because of reputations and because it's going to take time to get that message right, to get into the right doors with the right people. This is an approach that is also based on mostly cold outreach and then increasingly with AI, fake personalization, which is basically like saying, hey, here's this thing that I know about you. I'm going to regurgitate it back to you. Personalization can be useful, but this is over leveraging it in a way that doesn't seem organic or real. And it usually doesn't work. And again, it creates this negative cycle because people press the manual spam button, everything goes to spam or the promotions folder, open rates go down, and then you're left saying what's going on. So in a second, we're going to talk about a better methodology for avoiding that. Another thing that's really important to point out is the typical playbook is built on a complicated tech stack. It involves multiple channels right out of the gate, like LinkedIn, email, phone, SMS, all sorts of other things. And it's not to say there isn't value to adding more channels at certain times that can be useful. But the issue is 99% of our clients have tiny sales teams. Sometimes it's just the owner. Even in bigger agencies, it's typically one salesperson who is doing other things. So all this stuff, all these tactics can be useful, but only if you have the human capital, the resources, the mental bandwidth to juggle them. So it needs to be a process that's manageable for a small team and that is kind of getting the most bang for the buck based on relatively few people involved in the process. And then the biggest issue is that this playbook assumes that the missing piece of the puzzle, that the gap that needs to be climbed, is an awareness gap. If only these people knew about how great we were, if only they saw our case studies, if only they knew how we thought about things, then they would be willing to talk to us and do business with us. Yes, that stuff matters. They're going to need to go through that. The question is when. And at the top of the funnel, when you're reaching out to them for the first time, awareness is not the missing piece. And in a second, we are going to talk about what that missing piece actually is. So to do that, we are going to go back to the 1960s. There was this copywriter who was really brilliant. He worked for one of the big agencies and he wrote this kind of obscure copywriting book. It's definitely an advanced book. And it's kind of hard to find. It's called Breakthrough Advertising, and that copywriter was named Eugene Schwartz. And what he observed is that there's 5 stages of market sophistication. I'm going to talk about the first 4. So the first stage is unaware. I almost think about this as when the car was introduced for the first time, or Facebook. It's the classic, if people asked what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. People just don't know that this even exists or that this particular problem could even be solved. So that's the unaware phase. Essentially, like you could never run, let's say, Google search ads for it because nobody even knows it exists. Stage 2 is problem aware. And this is basically when there start to be more competitors entering the market and the copy tends to get longer. Stage 3 is solution aware. So this is when there are competing solutions and it's really about the mechanism of action. An example of this that I think Eugene brings up is Schlitz beer in, I think, the early 20th century. Basically were the first brewer to describe the process of brewing beer in their advertising. They said, we get the hops, we do this, we do that. And it was the same process that every brewer was using. They were just the first to describe it. And that created this mechanism of action that became appealing to people. So the theme is that the copy and the explanations tend to get longer as we go through this. Stage 4 is product aware. I think an example of this would be like Uber and Lyft. People understand the problem, they understand the solutions, and they understand what those actual providers are. And it's really kind of this all-out battle for market share. So Uber and Lyft is an example of that. Now, there might be situations where you have different buyers in different stages depending on who you're selling to. If you're selling, website services to old school manufacturers, they could be at an earlier stage than if you're selling websites to tech startups. But overall, by and large, what we tend to see from doing this for a long time is that most prospects for agency services are in stage 5. And that is the most aware stage. At the most aware stage, buyers tend to be more skeptical. When it comes to agency services, for example, chances are they have worked with multiple agencies. They might have had negative experiences. While they may not be complete experts on your area of expertise, they generally know what's going on. And the thing that makes selling agency and B2B service companies different than, let's say, selling a tech product, like a SaaS product, for example, is that people don't get to enjoy the benefits of what you do until weeks or even months after you've delivered. It's not like a SaaS product that you just get to take a demo of and then you get to immediately start getting value from. So back to the earlier question, what is that gap we have to get over when we are doing outreach to people that are mostly in stage 5? And that gap is lack of trust. And we experienced this trust gap firsthand, and we've seen it get worse over time. So again, we've worked with 110 plus agencies. We've seen a lot of these changes over the years. And a few years ago, we were doing a playbook that was more like the traditional one that we believe to now be broken, right? We were working with an agency that was perfectly positioned. They were well specialized to the tech industry. They worked with just about every blue chip tech company under the sun. They were based in the SF Bay Area. One of the owners wanted to retire, and they were looking to get acquired in the next few years. But their issue was, like most agencies, most of the business was reactive and it came from referrals. So they knew they needed to figure out a more scalable channel. So we started working with them and we tried everything under the sun to get meetings, right? We were sending case studies. We were using mass email, LinkedIn. I think we might have used phone at some point, tried every variant, every A/B test, every permutation, and it was really a very low meeting rate. It was crickets, and we knew we were probably going to get fired if we didn't change things up, right? So at one point, we decided to do an experiment. We decided to do something a little bit out of left field. So instead of doing the classic sales and marketing playbook where we said, hey, here's how great we are, here's how to make you more aware of how great we are, do you want to buy from us, all that lengthy stuff, what we did is we said, all right, we're going to do some data mining. We're going to find all of your prospects that used to work at one of your biggest clients and have now gone on to another company that you could do business with. I don't remember the names of those companies. Let's say we found everybody at HP, and then we went on to find a variety of different companies that people had moved on to, like maybe Symantec or whatever. So we said, hey, I saw you used to work at HP. We've done a lot of work with them over the years. Hope all is well at Symantec. Was hoping to run an idea by you, something to that effect. And then from that, we got probably over a dozen meetings in the high level areas. This is probably like VP and above, C-level. And a couple of them went on to close for major six-figure engagements. And then that agency went on to get acquired. So that planted a seed in a pretty dramatic way, right? And we said, this is interesting. This had nothing to do with traditional sales and marketing copy. It had nothing to do with just mass spray and pray, although we were doing it at a relative scale. We were probably contacting, a few hundred or maybe the low thousands of people over the course of a few weeks. But it really worked. And then we started expanding out this concept, and now it's all we do. We developed it into a methodology that I've since published a book by the same name called Relationship Sales at Scale. It's all about how to find your virtual tribes and reliably grow your agency or professional service business. So again, here's the broken playbook: finding and converting buyers. Salesperson often can't offer value. Contact thousands, spray and pray. Cold outreach based personalization, basically AI personalization now, which looks fake. Complicated tech stack that a small team can't manage, and it assumes awareness is the missing ingredient. So here's how we're doing things differently. One, we are looking to build relationships with prospects, not just find buyers and look for these needles in a haystack. Another thing is we're usually running this for somebody that can offer value. It does not have to be an owner, but it should be somebody that can offer value, teach, and consult on that first conversation. Instead of contacting thousands weekly, we're contacting hundreds, both because our clients need to be well specialized and they need to, basically have enough of a niche, or even if they're not niched yet, they're in that process and they can use Outbound to hone that even more. Instead of cold outreach, although we do have to do that sometimes, we're trying to do as much commonality-driven outreach as possible, which is something that I'll talk about in a second. Instead of a complicated tech stack, we are starting with a single channel. And in most cases, this is email. So one question that often comes up is, what channel do we use? Do we use LinkedIn? Do we use email? Do we use phone? Do we use passenger pigeon? All of the channels have their own pros and cons, right? And I think they do matter. But there's a few things that work. The first is, again, we don't want to have too many at once. We really want to start with one so that it's something that the small team can manage. You can start out with a whole bunch, get overwhelmed, then the whole thing falls apart. There's a few advantages to email. The first is that it can scale much more easily. The second is you can have much more control over it. It's not a channel anybody owns. It's really just a protocol. So versus a LinkedIn, there's lots of rules. You're not even supposed to technically have somebody else in your account. And I think the third and most important reason is that it's still where we go to make plans and do business. Versus a LinkedIn can be very effective. There's nothing wrong with LinkedIn, but it has more distractions going on. So often it's harder to convert people to the meeting. So again, all the channels have their own pros and cons. We're not married to email, but we often like to start here. And the most important difference from the usual playbook is, instead of assuming that awareness is the missing ingredient, we assume that trust is the missing ingredient. And that informs everything we do with this relationship sales at scale approach. So next you might be wondering, okay, how does this actually play out? And to answer that question, I want to drill down to point 4, which is commonality-driven outreach. So again, most people are doing massive cold outreach. Sometimes they'll try to personalize it, which is basically just regurgitating information back at somebody. Hey, Bob, I saw you worked at Acme and you like to go to watch football on the weekends. It's not really that compelling. The thing that is actually compelling and actually builds trust because it indicates that somebody is in your tribe is being able to connect with those people that share certain commonalities, even if those commonalities might feel very light. In a second, I'm going to give some examples of this, but to talk about why we believe this works, we are going to base this on the work of sociologist Robin Dunbar, who you might know from the concept of Dunbar's number. Here's what that looks like. So here's you. You have a circle of 5, right? This might be your very closest family or friends. From there, you have a bigger circle of 15. These are generally very close friends, people you continue to confide in. This tends to expand out by triples. From there, you have 150 casual friends. These are the people you might invite to a wedding or some once in a lifetime event. From there, you have about 500 acquaintances. These are people that you would talk to on the street. Hey, I haven't seen you in a while, sort of thing. Next, you have 1,500 familiars. This is essentially what's referred to as Dunbar's number. These are the people whose face you could put to a name. And then our experience has been there are thousands of other people that we refer to as lukewarms, who are those that would be willing to talk to you based on a compelling business and or personal commonality. So you might be wondering, okay, how does this actually play out? What are some examples of this? To get into a case study, this is a recent client of ours named Lindsay Satula, and she runs the agency Top Fox based out of the Denver area. So like most of our clients, most of the business was coming from referrals and these kind of more reactive channels. Lindsay was pursuing or continues to pursue a variety of verticals in the B2B services area and beyond that as well. So we knew if Lindsay just did the usual playbook and went in cold and said, hey, we're yet another agency, can we build your website? They would probably ignore her or tell her to go away. Even if they did have a website need, which is a needle in a haystack, chances are that her outreach would have just gotten buried alongside all the other spam that people are getting from India and abroad, right? So what we recommended she do and what she did based on our methodology is basically build the data in the right way. So first, identify all those accounts, make sure that the copy is fluent or is connected to those business problems based on 3 ideal client profiles or ICPs, which are basically buckets of companies. So if she was going after one particular B2B service niche, that copy would reflect that. So getting the accounts right was like the first level of the foundation. Then we had her map all of the people across all of those accounts. So she's front loading a lot of the work so she doesn't have to do it over and over again. So basically her whole and total addressable market, more or less, was right at her fingertips. And then what she did was she segmented by commonality. So she built a number of different geographic campaigns, starting with the obvious, her own backyard and the Denver area. So then she can open that message and say, hey, I'm based in Denver too. I'm probably right down the street from you. I go to this coffee shop. I'm not sure if she literally said that, but that's the vibe. And then from that, after building the system, she was able to get meetings in the first week and start ramping up this process for getting out past reactive new business and getting something that can scale a lot more by de-risking these calls. Another example of this is Integral. So Integral goes after the biggest companies on earth, Fortune 500 or even the Fortune 100. So they do internal employee communications, right? So there has to be a company that has thousands of employees. And I want to get back to one of those benefits that I covered earlier, which is how Outbound can weave its way into other things that agencies might be doing. So in this case, Integral was going to events in their space in the employee engagement and communications areas. So what they did is they used this approach to run geographic campaigns based on those events. So being able to say, hey, we're going to this event in your backyard in a few months. Can we set up some time to talk? And they were able to get very high level meetings from doing that. And that's based on a sales team that had never done anything like this before. Everything was referral based. Their sales team was actually new to even being in sales. They'd been in more of a client service and advisory position before that, but they were able to build confidence by setting up these meetings in a batched, leveraged way. To get to another one, Mark Scrivener is the CEO of Snapshot, and they provide a variety of marketing services to a number of different verticals, but they primarily specialize on financial services like banks and credit unions. So again, if we just went to banks and credit unions and said, hey, we're another agency, do you want to hire an agency right now? That's not going to work, right? Because most of them have existing marketing resources. They're just going to say, no, we're not looking to do that. So we have to get that door open though and really focus on building a relationship. So what happened was there were accounts built first, and then we went on to mapping all the people across those accounts. And then we segmented by those who are originally from Mark's home area. We said, hey, I'm originally from this place. That's cool. Perhaps we know some of the same people. We're this agency. We've worked with these competitors like you. Would you be open to a call so that we can be a resource in the future? We probably got around a dozen meetings from that, and the timing was good on one of them, which went on to close for a multi-six-figure engagement. And what we find is while you can't bank on this happening, pardon the pun, if you do outbound long enough, you will get lucky, right? There is that right place, right time dynamic that can happen and that can be very powerful. So beyond that, Snapshot's been able to add outbound as a more scalable channel so that they can continue to grow their agency. Another case study is Firebrand, which is a communications firm based in the Bay Area. They are pursuing growth stage tech companies, largely in the B2B space. Before working with us, most of their business was organic and again, coming from referrals. In this case, we actually found prospects originally from the UK because Morgan is originally from the UK. And we did that through some advanced data mining, and we're able to use that as the lead in. And then we had fun with it. We basically talked about the Tottenham Hotspur, which is Morgan's team, and they were like doing badly. So a lot of the banter was just about how bad the team was at that time, but it opened up these conversations and it got people to pay attention based on trust, because like what we were able to communicate to people is like, hey, I'm in your world and I am not this outsider that just wants to hard sell you on hiring an agency right now. Beyond that, here is a random smattering of companies we've been able to open doors with and get meetings with for our clients over the years. Going beyond this, in the past week, or let's call it, last 2 weeks, and if I'm looking at the record of meetings we've gotten, they include the likes of high-level people at Warner Brothers, Bleacher Report, U.S. Soccer, Campbell's Soup. Here are the sorts of responses we get. Somebody saying, hi, Eric, sounds good. So-and-so on our team will find time for us to chat. That's obviously a good win. Beyond that, I love this response because it really demonstrates why getting over the trust gap and showing people that, hey, I'm in your tribe, in your world, is the missing ingredient. This is somebody saying, this is where we did, let me back up a little bit. This is where we did a Canadian connections. We found other Canadian expats and used that as a way in. Darn this Canadian connection thing. I never respond to unsolicited requests like this, but your hook got me. I'd be happy to connect and chat. I am also always trying to build our connections for Phillips in the agency space. So this is somebody that is looking for help, that wants to engage agencies, but also doesn't respond to most people that reach out to him. So it really just goes to show that the missing ingredient is often trust. And it's just about figuring out how to do that at scale. Somebody else from Nihi Resorts agreeing to a meeting, and then an official at SAP agreeing to a meeting as well. So hopefully these case studies shed some light and give some examples of how powerful this approach can be. That said, it's going to take time. It's going to take work, no matter how you do it. And this is the approximate timeline that we see things playing out. So when we work with clients, and later we can get into more details on this, the first 3 months are going to be about building. This is really about implementing the right system, getting it running, and getting it going. Next is the optimize phase, lasting approximately months 4 through 6. This is all about improving KPIs and the sales process for a new type of sales interaction, which are going to be outbound people at various stages of the process. Some of those KPIs are going to include improving like open rates, reply rates, interested, and of course, meeting rates. Month 7 through 9 is basically the grow phase. This is where we often help our clients introduce new and more advanced campaigns. And then finally, we get to the scale phase, which is months 10 through 12 and beyond. This can mean different things depending on the individual goals of the organization. But to give some examples, often this might mean delegating more, bringing in that salesperson as the agency is moving into the transitionary phase, expanding, maybe adding new channels or adding additional campaigns, or growing into new markets if that's relevant.